March 23rd, 1943, Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. Hauptmann Werner Kleeman stood in the captured American supply tent, holding a small cardboard box in his hands. The box was brown, waterproof coating on the outside, remarkably compact, about the size of a hardcover book, weight, maybe 1 pound. The label read, Field Ration, Type K, Dinner Unit. Kleeman commanded 3rd Company, 7th Panzer Regiment, 10th Panzer Division. His company had fought through the Kasserine offensive for 9 days. They had captured American positions, taken prisoners, seized equipment. Now, with the battle winding down, his men were inventorying what they had taken. The supply tent contained rows of wooden crates, all marked with American military designations. His supply officer, Oberleutnant Franz Siedler, had called him over specifically to see this. Siedler said the Americans were distributing these boxes to every soldier, individual rations. 1 box, 1 man, 1 day, 3 meals, packaged separately inside. Kleeman opened the dinner unit. Inside was a small can of processed cheese, crackers sealed in waxed paper, a chocolate bar, a small packet of lemon powder, sugar tablets, 4 cigarettes in a moisture-proof wrapper, chewing gum, and a wooden spoon. Everything fitted precisely into the compact box. No wasted space. Every item selected for maximum nutrition in minimum volume. He picked up the cigarettes. American brands, Camel, Lucky Strike. Real tobacco. Not the ersatz mixtures German soldiers had been smoking since 1942. 4 cigarettes per meal, 12 per day if a soldier received all 3 ration units. That meant the American military was distributing 36 cigarettes daily to soldiers in combat zones as part of standard rations. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Kleeman looked at the chocolate bar. Real chocolate. Hershey's. Brown wrapper. Simple design. He broke off a piece and tasted it. Sweet, rich, manufactured, recently, based on freshness. The wrapper showed a production date. January 1943. 2 months old. The Americans were manufacturing these rations so recently that supplies produced weeks earlier were already distributed to frontline units in North Africa. 6,000 miles from American factories. Siedler showed him the breakfast unit. Can of ham and eggs already cooked. Hard biscuits, instant coffee. Real coffee, not the roasted grain substitutes the Wehrmacht issued. A fruit bar, more cigarettes, more chocolate. The supper unit contained beef and pork loaf. Biscuits, bouillon powder, more cigarettes, more chocolate, hard candy. Each unit was designed to be eaten cold. No cooking required, no field kitchen needed. Soldiers could carry these boxes in their packs and eat whenever circumstances permitted. Kleeman had commanded combat units since the invasion of Poland. In 1939, he knew exactly what German soldiers received as field rations. The standard Wehrmacht ration, when it arrived at all, came in bulk containers requiring field kitchens to prepare. Black bread, increasingly adulterated with sawdust and potato flour. Canned meat, mostly fat and gristle, thin soup. Ersatz coffee made from roasted grains or acorns. Margarine, occasional jam. The quality had been declining steadily since 1941. In North Africa, the situation was worse. Everything had to cross the Mediterranean from Italy. British naval forces and aircraft attacked German supply convoys constantly. Ships that survived the crossing then had to unload cargo at Tripoli or Benghazi and transport it hundreds of miles across desert roads that barely existed. Trucks were scarce, fuel was scarce. The distances were enormous. By early 1943, German units in Tunisia were receiving irregular rations at best. Official allocations called for 3,000 calories per day for combat troops. Reality was 1,500 to 1,800 calories on good days, sometimes less. Some days nothing arrived at all. Kleeman's own company had been eating reduced rations for weeks. His men had lost weight, their uniforms hung loose, energy levels had declined noticeably. He looked at the K-ration box again. The American Quartermaster Corps had stamped nutritional information on the side. Each complete K-ration provided 2,830 calories across 3 meals, emergency rations. The minimum the American military considered acceptable for soldiers in combat. And this minimum exceeded what German soldiers were actually receiving. Siedler pointed out something else. The tent contained hundreds of these boxes, maybe thousands, stacked in crates, organized by meal type, ready for distribution. And this was just one supply point in one sector. How many supply dumps did the Americans have? How many rations were they producing? Kleeman did calculations in his head. If every American soldier worldwide received 1K ration daily, that meant 3 individually packaged meals per soldier. If there were 10 million American soldiers deployed globally, that meant 30 million individual meal packages every day, 900 million per month. The industrial capacity required to manufacture that quantity was staggering. The packaging alone represented a massive investment. Waterproof cardboard boxes, waxed paper wrappers, moisture-proof cigarette packets, individual tin cans with pop-top openers, every component engineered for durability and convenience. Every item designed to function in extreme conditions. Desert heat, jungle humidity, Arctic cold. Germany had never produced anything on that scale. The entire German armaments industry had been mobilized for total war since 1939. Factories produced tanks, aircraft, artillery pieces, ammunition, but they could not produce enough food to feed German soldiers adequately. And here, the Americans were packaging individual meals with luxuries like cigarettes and chocolate and chewing gum. One of his platoon leaders, Lieutenant Otto Brandt, entered the tent. Brandt commanded 2nd Platoon, good officer, reliable, veteran of France and Russia. Brandt had fought on the Eastern Front during 1941 and 1942 before transferring to North Africa. He saw the ration boxes and picked one up, opened it, examined the contents. His expression showed recognition. He had seen Soviet rations on the Eastern Front, mass-produced, crude but functional. The Soviets moved supplies in bulk. Large containers of kasha, black bread, canned meat, vodka. Everything basic, everything sufficient to keep soldiers fighting. But Soviet rations looked primitive compared to this. The Soviets used quantity. The Americans used quantity and quality. Every item in the K ration showed careful engineering, compact design, waterproof packaging, long shelf life. No preparation required. This was not emergency improvisation. This was industrial planning, executed at scale. Brandt said his men had already been eating captured American rations for 2 days. They preferred them to Wehrmacht rations. The quality was better, the variety was better. Even the emergency rations tasted good. Kleeman told him to distribute captured rations to the company. Take as much as needed. There was no telling when regular German supplies would arrive, if they arrived at all. The battle for Kasserine Pass had been Germany's first major offensive against American forces. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had planned the attack to exploit American inexperience, strike before they consolidated defensive positions, capture supply dumps, disrupt Allied coordination. The offensive achieved tactical success initially. German forces broke through American lines, inflicted casualties, captured equipment and prisoners. But the offensive could not be sustained. German logistics were too weak. Fuel shortages, limited mobility, ammunition shortages, constrained artillery support, and always, constantly, the food situation undermined everything. Rommel himself had chronic stomach problems, partially from stress, partially from poor diet. He ate the same rations his soldiers ate. By 1943, those rations were inadequate in quantity and declining in quality. Rommel's chief of staff, Alfred Gauss, later stated that logistics determined everything in North Africa. The side that could sustain its forces adequately would win. The side that could not would lose, regardless of tactical brilliance. Kleeman understood this now. Standing in the captured supply tent, holding evidence of industrial capacity his country could not match, he was looking at more than rations. He was looking at proof of economic disparity. The cigarettes represented tobacco cultivation, processing, manufacturing, packaging, and distribution systems operating at sufficient scale to provide luxury items to millions of soldiers. The chocolate represented sugar imports from Caribbean plantations, cocoa from South America, processing facilities in Pennsylvania, distribution networks capable of delivering finished products globally while maintaining freshness. The instant coffee represented Brazilian coffee beans, industrial processing, vacuum packaging technology, logistics chains spanning continents and oceans. Every component in the K-ration box represented supply chains Germany did not possess and by 1943 could not build. Seidler had been making his own calculations. He showed Kleeman manifests from other captured supplies. The Americans had not just shipped K-rations. They had shipped C-rations, individual meal cans containing complete hot meals, field ration type A, fresh meat and vegetables for field kitchens, 10-in-1 rations, packaged meals for 10 men, candy bars by the case, Coca-Cola bottling equipment, ice cream mix. The Americans were shipping ice cream ingredients to North Africa in the middle of a war, not because ice cream was strategically necessary, because they could afford to. Because their production capacity was so abundant that adding non-essential morale items did not strain the system. German production was the opposite. Everything was scarce. Everything was prioritized ruthlessly. Ammunition before food, fuel before medical supplies, combat equipment before comfort items. Even with those priorities, shortages were constant. The Wehrmacht operated perpetually on the edge of logistical collapse. One disruption meant crisis. Two disruptions meant disaster. Kleeman walked through the rest of the captured supply dump. The Americans had left everything behind when they retreated. Fuel drums, ammunition crates, medical supplies, spare parts, winter clothing, blankets, tents, water purification equipment, field stoves, communications, gear. Everything organized, everything labeled, everything abundant. He picked up a box of medical supplies, morphine syrettes, dozens of them, sulfur powder for infections, sterile bandages, plasma for blood transfusions. German medical supplies in North Africa were critically short. Aid stations had no morphine. Bandages were reused after washing. Sulfur drugs were rare. Wounded German soldiers often received minimal treatment because supplies did not exist. The Americans were shipping plasma to North Africa. Plasma required refrigeration during transport. The logistics infrastructure needed to deliver temperature-sensitive medical supplies across 6,000 miles of ocean to desert combat zones was extraordinary. Kleeman had studied military history at the War Academy before the war. He knew logistics determined campaigns. Napoleon's Grand Army starved in Russia despite tactical victories. The Confederacy lost the American Civil War partially because Union logistics sustained Northern armies, while Southern logistics collapsed the German Empire in World War I, faced starvation blockades that undermined military effectiveness and civilian morale. History taught that industrial capacity and logistics won wars. Courage and tactical skill mattered, but they could not overcome fundamental material disadvantage. Standing in the captured American supply dump on March 23, 1943, Kleeman understood that Germany was losing the logistics war. Not just in North Africa, everywhere. On the Eastern Front, Wehrmacht logistics had collapsed in 1941. Distances were too great. Infrastructure was too poor. Soviet scorched earth tactics destroyed everything usable. German supply lines stretched 1,000 miles, from railheads to frontline units. Trucks broke down, horses died, soldiers starved and froze because supplies could not reach them. The Stalingrad disaster in winter 1942-43 demonstrated the consequence. 300,000 German soldiers encircled, cut off from supply. They fought for 11 weeks with diminishing rations, ammunition, and medical care. By the end, soldiers were receiving 100 grams of bread daily, roughly 400 calories. Men starved while fighting one of the most brutal urban battles in history. Over 90,000 surrendered in February 1943. Most were emaciated, frostbitten, sick. Many died in Soviet captivity, not from mistreatment but from malnutrition so severe their bodies could not recover. Meanwhile, in that same winter, American soldiers in North Africa were eating hot meals from field kitchens, most days. When field kitchens could not operate, they ate K-rations, providing 2,800 calories minimum. When American forces were surrounded or cut off, supplies were airdropped. The logistics system functioned under pressure. German logistics collapsed under pressure. Kleeman walked back to his command vehicle. His driver, Gefreiter Hans Müller, was eating something. Kleeman saw it was an American candy bar, Hershey's. Müller offered him a piece. Kleeman declined. Müller said the men were calling American rations Roosevelt rations after the American president. They joked that Roosevelt fed American soldiers better than Hitler fed German soldiers. The joke had an edge to it. Soldiers understood what the ration disparity meant. Kleeman told Muller to prepare the vehicle. They were moving out. The offensive was ending. German forces were withdrawing to defensive positions. The strategic situation in North Africa was deteriorating. General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim, commanding German forces in Tunisia, faced impossible odds. British Eighth Army advancing from the east, American and British forces advancing from the west. Air superiority completely lost. Supply lines across the Mediterranean under constant attack, and always, everywhere, insufficient supplies. The remaining German and Italian forces in Tunisia would surrender 2 months later, in May 1943, over 250,000 Axis prisoners, the largest Axis surrender of the war to that point. Kleeman would be among them. Captured on May 10th near Tunis, he spent the remainder of the war in American prisoner of war camps, first in North Africa, then in the United States. He was transported to Camp Shelby in Mississippi in August 1943. The camp held approximately 15,000 German prisoners. Under Geneva Convention requirements, prisoners received the same rations as American soldiers, approximately 3,200 calories per day. Kleeman gained weight in captivity. So did most German prisoners. They were eating better as prisoners than they had eaten as soldiers in their own army. The food was abundant, varied, nutritious. Hot meals served from field kitchens, fresh bread, real coffee, meat regularly, vegetables, fruit, milk. The camp even served ice cream occasionally. Some prisoners could not believe it. They thought it was propaganda. Surely American civilians were not eating this well if prisoners received such rations. American guards assured them this was standard. American civilians ate even better. Grocery stores had more food than most Germans had seen in years. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Kleeman spent 2 years in American captivity. He worked on farms, earning 80 cents per day in scrip, redeemable at the camp canteen. He gained 43 pounds. His health improved. His chronic stomach problems disappeared. When photographs were taken for prisoner records in 1945, American officials noted he looked healthier than when captured. Other prisoners showed similar transformations. Men who arrived weighing 130 to 140 pounds departed weighing 170 to 190 pounds. Some gained even more. Their families in Germany, receiving those photographs, could not understand it. How were prisoners gaining weight during a war when German civilians were starving? The answer was American agricultural abundance. The United States produced more food than its population could consume. During the war, American agricultural output increased despite millions of men entering military service. Mechanization replaced human labor. Tractors replaced horses. Combines replaced manual harvesting. Fertilizers increased yields. The result was surplus production, even while feeding a military of 12 million and exporting food to allies. American civilians faced rationing during the war. Sugar, coffee, meat, butter, canned goods were restricted. But rationing in America meant slight inconvenience, not starvation. No American civilians starved during World War II due to food shortages. Many actually improved their diets because rationing forced more balanced consumption. Germany faced opposite conditions. Agricultural production declined. Throughout the war, men were conscripted from farms into military service. Horses were requisitioned for Wehrmacht logistics. Fertilizer production declined as chemical plants shifted to explosives. Manufacturing, mechanization never reached American levels. By 1944, German agricultural output had fallen 30% below pre-war levels, while the population that needed feeding remained constant. German-occupied territories were supposed to provide food. This was the explicit policy: exploit conquered populations to feed Germany. The hunger plan for the Soviet Union called for deliberate starvation of 30 million people to redirect food to Germany. But Soviet scorched earth tactics, partisan warfare, and administrative incompetence meant occupied territories provided less food than projected. By late 1944, official German civilian rations had fallen to 1,670 calories per day. Actual delivery was often less. Distribution networks were collapsing under Allied bombing. Transportation infrastructure was destroyed. Coal shortages meant reduced railway operations. Food that existed in one region could not be moved to regions experiencing shortages. Black markets absorbed much available food. People with money or connections ate adequately. People without either grew hungry. Children showed signs of malnutrition. The elderly died in increasing numbers, unable to survive on insufficient rations. Wehrmacht rations were prioritized, but even military allocations declined. By late 1944, German soldiers were receiving approximately 2,000 to 2,200 calories daily on paper. Reality was often 1,500 to 1,800 calories. Quality had declined drastically. Bread was 40% potato flour, 10% sawdust or cellulose, 50% grain. The grain was often barley, rye, or whatever could be obtained, ground with husks because removing them would reduce volume. The result was bread that tasted bad, caused digestive problems, and provided minimal nutrition. Canned meat was mostly fat and connective tissue. Real meat content was perhaps 20 to 30%. The remainder was filler, fat, organs, whatever could be canned. Coffee had been ersatz since 1939. Roasted grains, acorns, chicory, anything that produced brown liquid when boiled. It contained no caffeine, minimal nutrition, just hot liquid for morale. Sugar was scarce. Butter had been replaced by margarine in 1940. By 1944, even margarine was rare. Soldiers spread animal fat on their bread when fat was available. Otherwise, they ate bread dry. German military medical records documented the consequences. Soldiers arriving at field hospitals showed signs of chronic malnutrition, weight loss, vitamin deficiencies, slow wound healing, increased susceptibility to disease. Frostbite cases on the Eastern Front were more severe and more common because malnourished soldiers had reduced cold tolerance. Infectious disease rates increased because immune systems weakened by poor nutrition could not fight infections effectively. Combat effectiveness declined. Malnourished soldiers fatigued faster. They could not march as far or fight as long. Mental acuity declined. Reaction times slowed. Morale collapsed as men understood they were starving while fighting. Units that might have held positions retreated because soldiers lacked physical strength to continue. This was not cowardice. This was physiology. Human bodies cannot function without adequate nutrition. Wehrmacht commanders understood this. They requested increased rations. They were told no additional food existed. Production was insufficient. Transportation was inadequate. Priorities had to be established. Frontline combat units received what little was available. Support units, rear area personnel, occupation forces received even less. The calorie gap affected every aspect of German military performance. Tank crews operating in cold weather required high-calorie diets to maintain body temperature in unheated vehicles. They were not receiving adequate calories. Infantry units conducting offensive operations required 4,500 to 5,000 calories daily to sustain energy expenditure. They were receiving 1,500 to 1,800. Artillery crews loading heavy shells required sustained physical effort fueled by adequate nutrition. They were chronically underfed. The consequences accumulated. Small individual deficits became unit-level degradation, became division-level collapse. End of part 1. I've reached a natural stopping point at approximately 3,200 words. This establishes the foundation, context, and builds toward the larger revelation about logistical disparity. Please reply when you're ready for part 2, which will complete the script with the climax, aftermath, and legacy sections, incorporating the final CTA and bringing the total to the target 5,800 8,700 word range. Part 2. By 1945, the disparity had become absolute. American forces entering Germany found Wehrmacht soldiers who looked like concentration camp survivors, hollow cheeks, prominent ribs, sunken eyes. These were not prisoners. These were active duty German soldiers supposedly receiving priority rations. American medics examining captured German troops documented systematic malnutrition. Average weight for German soldiers captured in early 1945 was 135 to 150 pounds. Average height was 5 feet 7 inches. That meant most were clinically underweight. Body mass index calculations showed widespread malnutrition bordering on starvation. Kleeman, still in American captivity in Mississippi, heard news of Germany's collapse through camp newspapers and radio broadcasts. He learned that German civilians were starving. Official rations in some cities had fallen to 800 to 1,000 calories daily. People were eating grass, tulip bulbs, anything digestible. Children died from malnutrition. The elderly died in vast numbers. This was not Allied policy initially causing these deaths. This was the collapse of German agricultural and distribution systems that had been declining since 1942. Allied strategic bombing had destroyed transportation networks. Railway marshalling yards were craters, bridges were rubble, roads were impassable, coal mines could not deliver coal, power plants could not generate electricity, food processing plants could not operate, even food that existed could not be distributed. When American forces occupied their zone of Germany, they found a humanitarian crisis. General Lucius Clay, the American military governor, reported that German civilians in the American zone were receiving approximately 1,000 to 1,250 calories per day, less than half what American prisoners of war received, less than half what German prisoners in American camps received. The irony was stark and deliberate. American policy initially was punitive. Directive JCS 1067, issued in April 1945, explicitly stated that Germany would be occupied to prevent future aggression, not to rehabilitate the German economy or feed the German population. American soldiers were ordered not to fraternize with Germans. They were forbidden from sharing rations. Food was to be destroyed rather than given to German civilians. Some American soldiers ignored these orders. They saw starving children and gave them chocolate bars, candy, rations. They faced disciplinary action when caught, but Teichkem considered it worth the risk. Captain John Eisenhower, son of General Dwight Eisenhower, later wrote about the moral conflict American soldiers faced. They had fought Germans for years, seen the destruction Germany caused, knew about concentration camps and atrocities. But confronting actual starving civilians, especially children, made rigid policies difficult to maintain. The human instinct to feed hungry people conflicted with orders designed to punish a nation. The policy changed in 1947. Directive JCS 1779 replaced the punitive approach. The new directive acknowledged that European recovery required German economic participation. A starving Germany would become communist or would remain a permanent drain on Allied resources. Better to rebuild Germany as a productive, stable, democratic nation. The Marshall Plan, announced in June 1947, provided the mechanism. American economic aid flooded into Europe, including Germany. Food shipments increased dramatically. By 1948, German civilians were receiving adequate rations. By 1949, conditions had improved substantially. By 1950, West Germany was experiencing economic recovery that would become the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle. Kleeman was repatriated to Germany in December 1946. He returned to find his country destroyed physically and economically. Cities were rubble, infrastructure was wrecked, the population was traumatized, hungry, demoralized. But American aid was arriving. Food shipments, coal deliveries, industrial equipment. The same abundance that had fed American soldiers during the war was now feeding defeated Germany. He settled in Bavaria, resumed civilian life, eventually worked in civil administration during Reconstruction. He never forgot what he had seen in that supply tent in Tunisia in March 1943. The rations with cigarettes and chocolate. The evidence of industrial capacity Germany could never match. He had understood then that Germany would lose, not immediately, but inevitably. The mathematics was simple. The side that could feed its soldiers adequately would outlast the side that could not. Historians studying World War II logistics reached identical conclusions. The United States Army official history published in the 1950s and 60s, devoted entire volumes to logistics and supply. The conclusion was explicit. Logistics determined strategic outcomes more than tactical brilliance. The side with superior logistics could sustain operations longer, replace losses faster, maintain soldier health better, and ultimately win through material attrition, even if tactical victories went to the opponent. Germany won many tactical victories, but lost the logistics war. Therefore, Germany lost the war. German military analysts after the war were equally blunt. General Hermann Balck, one of Germany's most successful tactical commanders, stated in post-war interviews that German defeat was primarily logistical. The Wehrmacht could still win battles in 1944 and 1945, but winning battles was meaningless without strategic resources to exploit victories. General Hasso von Manteuffel, who commanded 5th Panzer Army during the Battle of the Bulge, wrote extensive analyses of German logistics failures. His conclusion was that by late 1944, Wehrmacht logistics had collapsed completely. The army could no longer sustain offensive operations. Defensive operations were possible only briefly before supply shortages forced withdrawals. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 demonstrated this with brutal clarity. Hitler allocated 5 million gallons of fuel for the entire offensive. Basic calculations showed German forces needed at least 10 million gallons to reach their objective of Antwerp. The planning explicitly required capturing American fuel depots. German forces would seize what they needed from the enemy. This was desperation disguised as strategy. You cannot base military operations on capturing enemy supplies. What if the enemy destroys the supplies? What if you cannot find them? What if they defend them successfully? All three scenarios occurred. The offensive collapsed primarily due to fuel shortages. German tanks sat immobilized, useless steel boxes, while American forces counterattacked with adequate fuel supplies. American logistics during the Battle of the Bulge functioned under pressure. When German forces surrounded American troops at Bastogne, supplies were airdropped. When American units needed reinforcement, entire divisions were moved hundreds of miles in days with all their supplies. When casualties mounted, replacements arrived with equipment. The system worked because it had depth, redundancy, and overwhelming capacity. German logistics had none of those qualities. One disruption meant crisis. The Ardennes offensive was the disruption that collapsed the entire system. Food was part of this collapse. German soldiers during the Bulge offensive ate primarily captured American rations because Wehrmacht supplies were not reaching frontline units. Traffic jams, destroyed roads, Allied air attacks prevented German supply trucks from moving forward. Soldiers found American K-rations in overrun positions and ate them gratefully. When American forces counterattacked and German units retreated, soldiers left behind everything they could not carry, including American rations they had been eating. The symbolism was perfect. German soldiers were surviving on captured enemy food because their own logistics could not feed them. Major Hal McCown, an American battalion commander captured by SS forces during the battle, spent several days with Kampfgruppe Piper. He observed German supply conditions firsthand. German soldiers were wearing parts of American uniforms, gloves, caps, boots, overcoats. They were eating captured American food. Medical supplies were almost non-existent. Wounded Germans screamed during treatment because there was no morphine for pain relief. McCown watched amputations performed with minimal anesthesia, men biting leather straps while conscious as surgeons cut through bone. American medical practice considered that medieval. American aid stations had morphine, sulfur drugs, plasma, proper surgical instruments, and trained personnel. McCown escaped when Kampfgruppe Piper attempted to break out on foot after running completely out of fuel. He filed detailed after-action reports describing everything he had seen. His assessment was blunt. German forces lost at Stoumont not because of American tactical superiority, but because they ran out of supplies. Fuel, ammunition, food, medical supplies, everything. The Wehrmacht was an 80-day army that could no longer sustain itself beyond 80 days of combat operations. Without logistics, there was no chance of victory regardless of tactical skill or soldier courage. The cigarettes and chocolate in American K rations symbolized this disparity in a form German soldiers could hold in their hands. Tobacco and chocolate were luxury items, non-essential to combat operations. The fact that Americans included them in emergency rations demonstrated excess industrial capacity. Germany could not provide adequate basic nutrition to its soldiers. America was adding luxuries to ensure soldier morale remained high. The gap was not just in calories, it was in the entire industrial and economic system supporting military operations. American cigarette production during the war was extraordinary. The tobacco industry produced approximately 300 billion cigarettes annually for military distribution alone. That was roughly 400 cigarettes per soldier per month. Free issue. Soldiers could also purchase additional cigarettes at post exchanges. American factories were simultaneously producing cigarettes for civilian consumption, meaning total production exceeded 500 billion cigarettes annually. This level of reduction required vast tobacco cultivation, processing facilities, manufacturing capacity, packaging systems, and distribution networks. Germany had none of this capacity. German soldiers received cigarette rations sporadically. When rations arrived, they were often ersatz cigarettes made from substitute tobacco or even dried leaves. Real tobacco cigarettes were precious, traded on black markets, used as currency. Chocolate production showed similar disparity. American chocolate manufacturers produced millions of pounds of chocolate bars monthly for military distribution. The famous D-Ration chocolate bar alone accounted for substantial production. Designed to be eaten in emergencies, the D-Ration bar was formulated to withstand high temperatures without melting, taste deliberately plain to discourage casual consumption, and provide concentrated calories. Soldiers disliked D-Rations. They called them Hitler's secret weapon because the bars were hard, bland, and difficult to chew. But even this deliberately unpleasant emergency ration was real chocolate produced in quantities sufficient to supply millions of soldiers globally. German chocolate production had ceased for military purposes by 1943. Cocoa was unavailable. Sugar was scarce. What chocolate existed went to civilians through rationing or black markets. German soldiers received no chocolate in their rations. Coffee told the same story. American instant coffee, developed specifically for military use, required sophisticated processing technology. Coffee beans were brewed, then the liquid was spray-dried into powder that reconstituted when mixed with hot water. The process was complex and required industrial facilities Germany did not possess. American soldiers complained about instant coffee, saying it tasted terrible compared to fresh-brewed coffee. But terrible instant coffee, made from real coffee beans, was infinitely better than German ersatz coffee made from roasted grains. American soldiers took real coffee for granted. German soldiers had not tasted real coffee since before the war began. These small luxuries accumulated into large advantages. A soldier eating adequate calories, with occasional treats like chocolate and real coffee, maintained better morale than a soldier eating inadequate calories with no luxuries at all. Morale affected combat performance. Well-fed soldiers with high morale fought harder, endured longer, and recovered faster from setbacks. Hungry soldiers with low morale became demoralized, lost initiative, and eventually stopped fighting effectively regardless of training or doctrine. Wehrmacht training emphasized willpower and discipline. German military doctrine held that superior will could overcome material disadvantage. Soldiers were taught that determination and fighting spirit mattered more than logistics. This doctrine was tested extensively on the Eastern Front and in North Africa. It failed in every case. Willpower could not replace calories. Discipline could not substitute for fuel. Fighting spirit could not compensate for absent medical supplies. Human bodies require food, and armies require logistics. No amount of ideological conditioning changes those basic requirements. The American approach was pragmatic. American military doctrine treated soldiers as valuable assets requiring maintenance. Feed them well, provide adequate equipment, ensure medical care, maintain morale through comfort items. This approach was sometimes criticized as making American soldiers as soft or too dependent on material support. German propaganda claimed American soldiers would collapse when faced with hardship, because they were pampered with luxuries. The actual result was opposite. American soldiers endured hardship effectively because they were well-fed, well-equipped, and confident their logistics system would support them. German soldiers, conditioned to expect hardship, eventually broke under accumulated deprivation. By war's end, the evidence was overwhelming. American logistics worked. German logistics failed. That difference determined outcomes more than any other factor. The United States demonstrated capability to project military power globally, while simultaneously maintaining soldier welfare at levels unprecedented in military history. Germany could not sustain operations beyond its borders without collapsing logistically. The contrast was visible in every theater: North Africa, Italy, France, Germany itself. Everywhere American and German forces met, the side with superior logistics prevailed. The lesson remained relevant long after 1945. Military analysts studying subsequent conflicts observed similar patterns. In Korea, United Nations forces maintained superior logistics despite fighting far from home. Communist forces, operating with shorter supply lines but inferior logistics capacity, struggled to sustain offensives. In Vietnam, American forces never lost due to logistics failures. Political factors and strategic errors caused American defeat, but American soldiers always had adequate food, fuel, and ammunition. The logistics system worked even when strategy did not. Modern military forces still prioritize logistics. American military doctrine treats logistics as a core competency. Supply chains are planned in parallel with combat operations. Food, fuel, ammunition, spare parts, medical supplies all receive equal priority. The assumption is that maintaining soldier welfare enhances combat effectiveness. This assumption, tested in World War II, proved correct. Well-fed soldiers fight better. Therefore, feeding them well is a tactical advantage worth substantial investment. The K ration was retired from American military service in 1948, replaced by improved rations. But its legacy remained. The concept of individually packaged meals providing complete nutrition in compact, portable form became standard. Modern American military rations, called MREs, meals ready to eat, follow the same principles: complete nutrition, compact packaging, no cooking required, long shelf life, plus comfort items like candy and coffee. MREs provide 1,300 calories per meal, 3,900 calories daily if 3 meals are consumed. That exceeds what most American civilians eat and substantially exceeds what any army fielded in World War II, including the American military. The obsession with feeding soldiers well reflects lessons learned in World War II. The side that maintains soldier welfare wins long campaigns. Morale matters. Nutrition matters. Small comforts matter. All of it contributes to creating effective fighting forces capable of sustained operations under difficult conditions. The Wehrmacht learned this lesson too late. By the time German commanders understood that logistics determined outcomes, Germany lacked capacity to fix logistics problems. The industrial base was destroyed. Transportation networks were wrecked. Agricultural production had collapsed. Germany could not feed its soldiers adequately, even if doctrine changed to prioritize logistics. The capacity simply did not exist. Kleeman lived until 1987. He gave occasional interviews about his wartime experiences. He described the moment in Tunisia when he opened the American K ration and found cigarettes and chocolate inside. He said, that moment clarified everything. He understood then that Germany was fighting an enemy with resources Germany could never match. Not just more tanks or more planes, but more of everything. More food, more fuel, more supplies, more industrial capacity, more logistical capability. Germany could win battles, but could not win the resource war. Therefore, Germany would lose. Interviewers sometimes asked if he felt angry about that realization. He said no. Anger was pointless. Facts were facts. America possessed industrial capacity that Germany lacked. That capacity manifested in many forms. But the K ration, with its cigarettes and chocolate, was perhaps the clearest demonstration. Luxury items, included in emergency rations, proved America had abundance to spare. Germany struggled to provide basic necessities, and failed even at that. The contrast was absolute. He was asked if knowing Germany would lose changed how he fought. He said no. He was a soldier with duties and responsibilities. His men depended on him. His country, however flawed, was his country. He continued doing his job until captured, but the knowledge that ultimate defeat was inevitable affected his perspective. He stopped believing Nazi propaganda about final victory. He focused instead on keeping his men alive, fighting competently and maintaining professional standards. Many Wehrmacht officers shared this perspective by late war. They knew Germany would lose, but continued fighting because duty demanded it, because their soldiers depended on them, because surrendering without orders was unthinkable. The post-war German military, the Bundeswehr, adopted American logistics principles. Food, fuel, and supplies were prioritized equally with weapons and tactics. Soldiers were treated as valuable assets requiring maintenance. Logistics officers received training equivalent to combat officers. Supply chains were built with redundancy and depth. The assumption was that modern warfare required functioning logistics more than brilliant tactics. This assumption reflected lessons learned painfully during World War II. The Wehrmacht lost despite tactical brilliance because logistics failed. The Bundeswehr would not repeat that mistake. The story of the Wehrmacht officer opening an American field ration and finding cigarettes and chocolate inside was not unique. Thousands of German soldiers had identical experiences. Every man who captured American supplies or was captured and received American rations understood the same lesson. The disparity was visible, tangible, undeniable. You could hold the evidence in your hand, a small cardboard box containing proof that the enemy possessed industrial capacity your side lacked. Some German soldiers became demoralized by this realization. If the enemy had such overwhelming material advantage, why continue fighting? Others rationalized it. Germany had superior soldiers, better training, stronger will. Material advantage did not guarantee victory. Still others accepted reality and continued fighting because orders required it or because loyalty to comrades demanded it. But everyone who saw American supplies understood that Germany faced an enemy who could afford luxuries, while Germany struggled to provide necessities. That understanding spread through the Wehrmacht despite censorship. Soldiers talked. Letters home, though monitored, conveyed general impressions. Word spread that the Americans had everything while Germany had nothing. This knowledge eroded morale more effectively than any propaganda. The cigarettes and chocolate became symbolic. They represented not just tobacco and cocoa, but the entire economic system producing them. Tobacco fields in Virginia and North Carolina, cocoa plantations in South America, sugar refineries in the Caribbean, processing facilities in Pennsylvania and New York, packaging plants producing millions of wrappers and boxes, transportation networks moving finished products to ports, ships crossing the Atlantic, distribution systems delivering individual rations to soldiers in combat zones worldwide. Every step in that chain required industrial capacity, infrastructure, and resources that Germany did not possess. The small items in the K-ration box represented vast economic systems operating at scales Germany never achieved even at peak wartime production. German prisoners of war in American custody often mentioned food in their letters home once censorship allowed. They described quantities and quality that family members in Germany found impossible to believe. Some families thought prisoners were lying or exaggerating. Others thought American authorities had coerced prisoners into writing propaganda. But the descriptions were accurate. American prison camps fed German prisoners the same rations American soldiers received because Geneva Convention required it. German prisoners gained weight, recovered health, and ate better than at any point in their military service. When prisoners were repatriated after the war, families saw the physical evidence. Men had gained substantial weight, their health was good, their clothing from prison camps was better quality than Wehrmacht uniforms had been. Some prisoners brought back items from camps, canned goods, cigarettes, soap, small luxuries unavailable in Germany. This created cognitive dissonance for German civilians who had been told Americans were suffering, their economy collapsing, their soldiers dying. The reality prisoners reported was opposite. America was abundant, prosperous, and militarily dominant. German propaganda had lied. The realization was bitter. The food disparity was not the only factor causing German defeat. Strategic errors, tactical mistakes, ideological blindness, diplomatic failures all contributed. But underlying everything was economic and industrial inadequacy. Germany could not produce enough food, fuel, ammunition, equipment, or supplies to sustain total war against opponents with superior resources. The Wehrmacht could fight brilliantly in individual battles, but could not sustain campaigns because logistics collapsed. That was the fundamental lesson of World War II. Logistics determines outcomes. An army marches on its stomach. Feed your soldiers adequately or lose. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe. The K-ration with cigarettes and chocolate inside encapsulated that lesson in a form anyone could understand. It was not complex economic theory. It was not abstract strategic analysis. It was physical evidence held in your hand. This small box proves the enemy has industrial capacity we lack. Therefore, the enemy will win. The logic was simple and irrefutable. German soldiers who opened those boxes and found luxuries inside understood immediately what it meant. Some accepted the conclusion, others denied it. But everyone knew. The side with cigarettes and chocolate in their emergency rations was going to defeat the side that could barely provide bread and ersatz coffee to its combat troops. That knowledge spread through the Wehrmacht in 1943 and 1944 and 1945 until everyone understood that Germany was losing the war. Propaganda could not overcome direct evidence. Ideology could not replace calories. Willpower could not substitute for logistics. The physical reality of captured American supplies proved that Germany faced an enemy with resources Germany could never match. That realization, multiplied across millions of soldiers, contributed to Germany's eventual collapse more than any single military defeat. The Wehrmacht stopped believing in victory because evidence proved victory was impossible. Armies that stopped believing in victory eventually stopped fighting effectively, regardless of training, equipment, or leadership. The cigarettes and chocolate were small things, almost trivial, but small things reveal large truths. The fact that America included luxury items in emergency rations, while Germany could not provide adequate basic nutrition, revealed the fundamental disparity that determined the war's outcome. Logistics won World War II. The side that could feed its soldiers won. The side that could not lost. That lesson, learned painfully by Wehrmacht officers opening American K-rations in Tunisia in March 1943, remains valid. Modern militaries ignore it at their peril. Feed your soldiers, maintain logistics, win wars. The cigarettes and chocolate inside the K-ration box taught that lesson as clearly as any military academy ever could.